Okay, welcome back again. Today we've done a lot of setting the scene, as it were, and this is a slot where we're cutting to the chase. So this is about the introduction of what we call the European Language Resource Coordination Action. And there are a number of people involved. The presentations actually will only be given by Khalid Shukri, and myself. But we have our colleagues from ILSP Athena here. This is Stelios Peperides. And of course also Andres Vasiliev from Tilde here to help us answer questions. And we hope that with this presentation we will have a chance to leave some time for discussion, because there might be quite extensive questions. Thank you. So this is about public service data for the automated translation digital services infrastructure. Let me give you a bit of background. I introduced most of the main players that are involved in this particular action. I should stress this is not a research project. This is a tender. We're operating on behalf of the automated translation DSI. So we're working for the EC on data collection, on the coordination of data collection across Europe. So it's not a research project. But of course there are a number of partners involved, and these partners have been hand-picked according to their competencies and expertise and experience. And Khalid will sort of like explain a little bit in his presentation who does what and why who does what. I'm just going to stay fairly high level and give you the basic ideas behind this, and I think sort of like, if you can call it like this, maybe the basic messaging behind what we want to do. Okay, the other partner who's not represented here today is TAUS, the Translation Automation User Society, and Jaap van der Meer is the main contact point there with TAUS. So let me just very briefly review the context again. Yeah, we've heard this many times, Europe is multilingual to the core, and we do not want to discriminate against any languages, be they big languages, small languages, etc. We don't want to have people, ideas, trade, commerce end up in silos because of languages. You know, we don't want people to be stuck because of languages, for example. So the single digital market, or the digital single market, is crucially a multilingual digital single market, and translation is one of the core enablers of that multilingual single digital market. And we need technology support for that. And the automated translation digital services infrastructure is a small part of that support for the multilingual digital single market. And I'll explain a little more about what this is and how this works. So it's based on statistical machine translation, Spiridon. I already explained that they're using Moses, and statistical machine translation is all about data. And what this project here, or this tender, it's not a project, very important, this tender, the European Languages Resource Coordination, is doing, it's supporting the Connecting Europe facility to collect data, and it will turn out to be some special kind of data for the automated translation digital services infrastructure. So the goal of the multilingual single digital market is the free flow of people, information, services, culture, and commerce. The goal of the automated translation DSI is a bit more narrow. It concentrates on providing services for the national governments, for public administrations, for public services in the broader sense, but also for NGOs. Okay. Now, statistical machine translation, most of you know, is all about data. Statistical machine translation actually learns how to translate from previous translations that were carried out by human expert translators. And these data are like previous translation, like bytext, bilingual data, but also monolingual data. Monolingual data is used by statistical machine translation systems to make the output fluent. So the more monolingual data you have in the target language, the more likely it is that the output of the statistical machine translation system sounds good. It conforms to what the structures are like in the target language. But you also need dictionaries, terminology, ontologies, named entities, etc. These are all core components and resources you need for good statistical machine translation. Very importantly, like people, like us, statistical machine translation is good at what it has learned. And it's really bad at stuff that it hasn't seen before, that it hasn't learned, that it hasn't had a chance to train on. To give you an example, if you train a statistical machine translation system on Harry Potter, okay, you do that, then that system is likely to be quite good at translating magic spells. You know? But it's not likely to be very good on translating this kind of material. So this is public service material. This is a form that some citizens have to fill in, for example, in the UK to get some service, etc. In fact, it's going to be lousy if you train on Harry Potter and you try to translate something like this, or if you try to translate weather reports. And the other way around, if you train on weather reports, it's going to be lousy on magic spells. Right? So machine translation systems need data, and they need data that is similar to what you actually want the machine translation system to use for. So you need the right kind of data. And in this case, we want to collect data for national governments, public administrations, public services, NGOs. So where do we get these data? Who holds that kind of data? Well, most likely the national governments, the public administration, the public services, and the NGOs. If we get this data, we can hand it on to the EC, we can hand it on to Spiridon, and Spiridon is able to train his domain-specific systems that can then be returned to the people that provide those data, and that can be integrated into their workflows, and it can help the national governments, the public administrations to make their interaction with customers multilingual. Because that's a situation that is much more and more common in Europe, and it's going to be even more frequent in the near future. So that's kind of like the idea. So what data formats does this data occur in? Well, this can be lots of stuff. This could be text processing files, this could be PowerPoint presentations, could be spreadsheets, PDF documents, could be databases, content management systems, websites, translation memories. It could be in many different places. Like, some national organizations might be very systematic about the data that they translated. With other organizations, it might be all over the place. They might not even have kept the translation data. They might only have the translation, but they may no longer have the target side, the source side of the translation, etc. So it'll be interesting to see kind of like what we unearth, what treasures we will discover with respect to our target audience. But where do we find this data? Yeah, well, with the national stakeholder institutions, with the governments, with the administrations, the NGOs, but also potentially with language services providers that were engaged by these institutions at some stage to do translation. Some of these institutions might have in-house translators, they might have a documentation department or something like that, but not all of them will. And very often, language service providers, LSPs, are engaged to perform translation. So these are also on our list of contact forms. There's a core assumption that underlies this particular action, and that assumption is that many public services hold relevant data because they have done translations in the past. Most of them very likely don't know about this. It's forgotten. It's not sort of like collected in a systematic way. It might be all over the place within big departments, etc. If the people that constitute our target audience do know that they have this data, very often they're not aware of the value of this data, that this is really useful to train translation technologies, that this is really useful to enable language technologies. So once we find the right people, once we help them to find the right data, which is not an easy task, we have to create a data awareness. This is really, really useful stuff. We can hand this to the EC can train services for you that are then provided back to you that make your life easier, that make Europe more multilingual, provide better services for citizens, for visitors, but also for refugees, etc. And then finally, if we have succeeded in taking these first three hurdles, they might be reluctant to give us the data, okay? And this might be due to very many reasons, like legal issues, anonymization issues, privacy protection issues. So it's not an easy task. So what do we have to do? We have to find the right people, find the right data, promote data awareness, help those people to find the data themselves within their institutions, I think in many cases, and we have to convince them to provide the data. And how do we do this? This is all about winning hearts and minds. And I'll come to that in a moment. The task is quite a big task. It's all EU member states, so there are 28 of those, plus the CEF-affiliated countries. So there's two more, there's Iceland and Norway. They're not part of the EC, but they've signed up to the CEF, and so there are 30 countries in total. So the only way to make this a success is to directly involve local expertise, responsibility, and ownership. And the way we're proposing to coordinate this data collection is to engage the local stakeholders. And the local stakeholders, we call them local anchor points or national anchor points. They come in pairs always. So one for each country and language. One of the twins, as we call them, is somebody from the languages background, from linguistics, from language technologies, etc. And these are highly renowned people nationally, but also internationally. They are scientists, or they are directors of language institutions or other large institutions that deal directly with language in the member states. And they have been selected specifically for their reach and impact into the local governments, and into the national governments, national NGOs, national public services, etc. The other part of the twin is a representative from the national government, from the public services, or from NGOs in some cases. And together, they're supposed to open doors, to be conduits to the people that hold the specific kind of data, the very, very special kind of data that we need to pass on to the EC, for the EC to provide better multilingual facilities for these public offices and public services across Europe. These national anchor points, as we call them, also form a board. It's called the Language Resources Board. This Language Resources Board will actually provide the governance structure for the European Language Resource Coordination Action. It will provide oversight, and it will also be used by the EC to go beyond this Language Resources Coordination Action and have an impact on the automated translation DSI altogether. So there are some plans for that. So in order to do that, we'll supplement the sort of like the twins, the 30 plus 30 important people across Europe, with key representatives of other organizations that have high profile in the data world. And these are representatives of Clarin, FlareNet, LTI. The list is a little bit longer. And we're currently in the process of getting these people together. Now, we already have most of the linguistics experts, the language technology experts in the board. And here's a list of them. Let me just pick one country. Let me pick Austria. So with Austria, we have Gerhard Budin, who is our representative. Gerhard is over there. And actually, there's so many with them already for most of the countries. Can I ask all the national anchor points just to stand up for a few moments so that you see them? Okay. So that's excellent. So some of them are here with us. So you see that these are all people with absolutely exceptional, outstanding standing. And we hope to collaborate very, very closely with them to make this data collection a success. They've already been instrumental in raising a total of over 300 contacts to national institutions across Europe that hold data resources. So they already have been very active, but there are two tasks for the national anchor points that we have here today for the 30 that are already appointed. So the ones that have been appointed are the ones that are the linguistic experts. But we still need to find most of the representatives that come from the national governments and the public institutions. So here are two concrete tasks for our national anchor points. The first is to help us find the government part of the twin. And the request here is to please suggest 2 or 3 national anchor points that come with a national government background. Pass that information to us, together with a few bullet points why you think that these are really exceptional people that have really good access, that can open doors with respect to public services, NGOs, etc. Then we will collect all of that information and we'll pass it on to the EC, and the EC will choose at the end. They've already approved the linguistics experts with the anchor points because we need to start somewhere, but they will want to see a choice. Maybe 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, or something like that from the national governments. Please send that to us. Please do that within the next 2 weeks, and we'll pass it on to the EC, and the EC will do the final selection, and then we can constitute the full board. And the second thing, the second very, very concrete request is, you've already helped us to identify 300 organizations. Many of these organizations are actually public services. For some countries more so than for others. We would like to ask you now also, over the next 2 weeks, if this is at all possible, to extend that seed database of contacts and to actually double that database, and with a specific focus on finding public services, local ministries, NGOs, etc. Because that's the kind of data that we're interested in. I should add, at the end of the day, we'll take any kind of data, because there's no data like more data. And they're very sophisticated ways, like, if you have some seed data for a particular domain, if you have a lot of general domain data, there's very smart, very clever technologies to supplement that seed data, which is domain adequate, from general data. So any kind of data is absolutely valuable, and it will be put to very, very good use in the automatic translation services that will be provided back to the member states and to the participating institution, in fact, to any institution. Okay, this is my final slide, and then I hand over to Khalid. So please help us create awareness across Europe, help us make this automated translation at DSI a success. It will provide better services for Europe's citizens. It will directly provide support for multilinguality. And very importantly, it will also give us, as language technology community, visibility within the EC. If this works well, and getting the right data is kind of like a precondition, it's necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. Without the right data, it will be very, very hard for AT at DSI to be a success for public services. But if it's a success, this will raise the profile for language technology research, for language technology education, for language technology businesses within the EC, and I think it's a huge opportunity. And finally, I think it's one of these really, really rare situations where we have a win-win situation, because supporting our languages, we can all now do something for Slovak, we can do something for Estonian, we can do something for Spanish and all these other languages. But doing something for our local languages, supporting our local languages, really means supporting Europe, really means supporting a multilingual Europe. And I think that's an excellent story. So thank you, and I hand over to Khalid, who will give you the details.